The Grand Ballroom at the Meridian Beverly Hills gleamed under crystal chandeliers, its marble columns and gold leaf moldings creating an atmosphere of understated luxury that had made it the preferred venue for Los Angeles's most exclusive celebrations. Tonight, the space was transformed into an elegant anniversary celebration for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary, with 50 family members and close friends gathered around tables draped in silk and adorned with arrangements of white orchids that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I stood near the entrance, adjusting my simple black dress and watching my family settle into their assigned seats with the kind of precision that only comes from careful social planning. The main table, positioned at the center of the room with the best view of the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, was reserved for the most important family members. My parents, my siblings, their spouses, and the various uncles, aunts, and cousins who had achieved the kind of professional success that warranted inclusion in the inner circle. "Isabella, sweetheart," Mom's voice carried across the room as she spotted me lingering near the entrance. At 55, Carmen Martinez was still stunning, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her designer gown flowing around her like liquid silk. She'd built Martinez Marketing from a small startup into a $100 million empire, and she looked every inch the successful executive she was. "You look lovely, Mom," I said, walking over to embrace her. The scent of her expensive perfume, something French and complicated, filled my nostrils as she air-kissed my cheeks with the precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of social interaction. "Thank you, darling. You look nice." She paused, her eyes scanning my modest outfit with barely concealed disappointment. "Simple but appropriate for your age group." Before I could ask what she meant by age group, my father appeared beside her, resplendent in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. At 58, Eduardo Martinez commanded attention wherever he went, his presence filling the space around him like expensive cologne. His construction empire had built half the commercial buildings in downtown Los Angeles, and he carried himself with the confidence that came from 40 years of turning dirt into gold. "There's my little girl," he said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of cigars and success. "I'm so glad you could make it tonight. I know these fancy events aren't really your scene." The comment stung, though I kept my expression neutral. "I wouldn't miss your anniversary celebration for anything." "Of course not," Dad said with obvious affection. "Family is family regardless of our different paths in life." The phrase "different paths" hung in the air like a polite way of acknowledging my supposed lack of success compared to the rest of the Martinez clan. I was about to respond when my brother Miguel appeared, his wife Sofia clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. "Isabella." Miguel's voice boomed across the ballroom with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. At 35 he was everything my parents had hoped for in a son: tall, successful, and completely devoted to expanding the family business empire. His custom Armani tuxedo probably cost more than most people's cars, and he wore it with the casual grace of someone who'd never worried about money. "Miguel, you look wonderful," I said, meaning it despite everything. He really did look like he'd stepped off the cover of GQ magazine. "Thanks, sis. You look like you." He laughed at his own joke, apparently finding my appearance somehow amusing. "Still shopping at Target, I see." "Miguel," Sophia chided gently, though her tone suggested mild annoyance rather than real disapproval. "Don't tease your sister about her fashion choices." "I'm not teasing, I'm observing," Miguel replied with a grin. "Isabella has always marched to the beat of her own drum. While the rest of us are building empires, she's out there. What is it you do again?" "Some kind of hospitality work." "I work in hotel management," I said carefully, the same vague description I'd been using for 5 years. "Right, hotel management. That's great. Someone has to manage the front desk and coordinate the housekeeping staff." The condescension in his voice was so thick I could taste it. Around us, other family members were beginning to gather, drawn by the sound of conversation and the opportunity to catch up on family news. "Speaking of management," said my sister Carmen, appearing with her investment banker husband David in tow, "we should probably figure out the seating arrangements. Mom and Dad have put a lot of thought into making sure everyone sits with their appropriate peer groups." At 33, Carmen was everything I'd failed to become: polished, connected, and married to a man who treated money like a renewable resource. Her dress probably cost more than I supposedly made in a month, and she wore it with the kind of confidence that came from never having to check price tags. Peer groups? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew where this was heading. Well, you know, Carmen said with false brightness, successful professionals sit together, young families sit together, and... She paused, clearly struggling to find a diplomatic way to finish the sentence. And what? I pressed. And people who are still finding their career footing sit together, she said finally. It's nothing personal, Isabella. It's just that conversation flows better when people have similar life experiences to discuss. The euphemism was almost impressive in its cruelty. People who are still finding their career footing was clearly code for family failures who couldn't afford to be included in serious adult conversations. Where exactly am I sitting? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer would be humiliating. Dad stepped forward, his expression shifting to something that might have been embarrassment mixed with paternal authority. Isabella, we've put you at table 7 with your cousin's children and some of the younger family friends. The kids' table? I said, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. It's not the kids' table, Mom protested, though her tone suggested she knew exactly how it sounded. It's the young professionals' table. People in their 20s and early 30s who are still building their careers. I looked across the ballroom to table 7, positioned in the corner with a partially obstructed view of the stage where a jazz quartet was setting up their instruments. The table was indeed filled with people significantly younger than my 32 years, college students, recent graduates, and family friends who worked in entry-level positions at various companies. Mom, I'm 32 years old. I know, sweetheart, but your career situation is more flexible than some of the other family members. We thought you'd be more comfortable with people who share similar professional challenges. Professional challenges. Another euphemism that felt like a knife between the ribs. Besides, Dad added, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when making final decisions, this is for successful adults only. The main tables are reserved for family members who've established themselves professionally and financially. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 32 years of life and 5 years of what they assumed was an entry-level hotel job, my own father was telling me I wasn't successful enough to sit with the grown-ups at his anniversary dinner. You'll sit with the children, Dad said, pointing toward table 7 with the kind of finality that suggested the conversation was over. This is for successful adults only. Around us, family members were beginning to take their seats at tables that had clearly been arranged according to some complex social hierarchy. The main table seated 12 of the most successful family members. Table 2 held the moderately successful relatives and family friends. Table 3 accommodated the younger professionals who showed promise. And table 7, tucked away in the corner, was apparently where they put the family disappointments. Of course, I said, forcing a smile despite the humiliation burning in my chest. I understand completely. Excellent, Mom said with obvious relief. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. Sometimes these formal events require difficult decisions about seating arrangements. I nodded and began walking toward table 7, but halfway across the ballroom I stopped and turned back toward my family. Actually, I need to use the restroom first, I said. I'll find my seat in a few minutes. Of course, dear, Mom called after me. Take your time. Instead of heading toward the ladies' room, I walked purposefully toward the hotel's administrative corridor, my simple black dress and confident stride carrying me past surprised servers and hotel staff who probably wondered why a guest was walking through employee areas. The manager's office was located on the second floor, accessible through a discreet elevator that required a special key card. Fortunately, I had access to every area of the hotel, though my family had no idea why. I knocked on the mahogany door marked General Manager, and heard a familiar voice call, "Come in." Marcus Holloway looked up from his desk with surprise and immediate recognition. At 55, he was everything you'd want in a luxury hotel manager. Impeccably dressed, unflappably professional, and completely devoted to ensuring that every guest had an extraordinary experience. He'd been with the Meridian chain for 15 years, working his way up from assistant manager to running the flagship Beverly Hills property. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, standing immediately and smoothing his perfectly pressed suit. "I had no idea you were in the hotel tonight. How can I assist you?" "Good evening, Marcus. I'm here for the Martinez anniversary celebration in the Grand Ballroom." His eyes widened slightly as he processed the information. The Martinez party? Are you related to the family? I'm the daughter who apparently isn't successful enough to sit with the adults, I said with a rueful smile. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to barely suppressed outrage. As one of the most professional hospitality managers in Los Angeles, he understood family dynamics and the subtle cruelties that could unfold during high-end celebrations. I see, he said carefully. And how can we make your evening more appropriate? I'd like to upgrade the Martinez party to the presidential suite for their after-dinner reception, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. And I'd like you to personally deliver the ownership documents along with their final bill. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too professional to question my instructions. Of course, Ms. Rodriguez. The presidential suite will be ready within 30 minutes. Shall I arrange for champagne and catering for the reception? The full package. And Marcus? I want them to understand exactly who owns the hotel where they've decided to seat their daughter at the children's table. It would be my pleasure, Marcus said with a slight smile that suggested he was looking forward to this particular guest service experience. I returned to the ballroom just as the first course was being served, slipping into my assigned seat at table 7 between a 23-year-old cousin who worked as a barista and a family friend who was still in college. The conversation at our table centered around student loans, entry-level job applications, and the challenges of living with roommates to afford Los Angeles rent. So Isabella, said my cousin Maria, cutting into her salad with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was making it last, what's it like working in hotel management? Do you get to meet celebrities and important business people? Sometimes, I said vaguely, watching the main table where my family was engaged in animated conversation about real estate investments and stock portfolios. That must be so exciting, said Jake, the family friend who was majoring in business at USC. I'm hoping to get into hospitality management after graduation. Maybe you could give me some advice about getting started in the industry. I'd be happy to, I replied, though I was distracted by the sight of my brother Miguel holding court at the main table, regaling the assembled successful adults with what appeared to be a hilarious story about his latest business acquisition. The dinner progressed through its 7 courses, each dish more elaborate than the last. At the main table, conversations flowed about private jets, vacation homes and business deals worth millions of dollars. At table 7 we discussed the rising cost of gas, the challenges of finding affordable apartments, and the various unpaid internships that might lead to actual employment. Isabella, said Maria during the fish course, your parents seem really successful. It must be hard sometimes having such high achievers in your family when you're still building your career. The comment was well-intentioned but brutal in its assumption. Here was my 23-year-old cousin expressing sympathy for my supposed inability to achieve the kind of success my family expected. It can be challenging, I agreed, watching my father stand up to deliver a toast about 30 years of marriage and the importance of family support. But you're doing important work, added Jake with the kind of earnest encouragement college students offer to adults they assume are struggling. Hotel management is a valuable service industry. Not everyone can be a high-powered business executive. Not everyone can be a high-powered business executive. The phrase echoed in my mind as I watched my family celebrate their various achievements while relegating me to the corner table with the college students and career starters. As dessert was being served, Marcus appeared at the main table with a silver tray bearing an elegant envelope. I watched from across the room as he approached my father with the kind of deferential professionalism that suggested important business was being conducted. Mr. Martinez, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the post-dinner quiet, I have some documents that require your immediate attention. Dad looked up from his conversation with obvious curiosity. Documents? What kind of documents? Ownership papers and billing information for your celebration this evening, Marcus replied, presenting the envelope with a slight bow. The main table fell silent as Dad opened the envelope and pulled out the documents inside. I watched his expression change from curiosity to confusion to absolute shock as he processed what he was looking at. Elena, he said to Mom, his voice barely audible, look at this. Mom leaned over to examine the papers, her face going through the same emotional journey Dad's had just completed. Around the main table, successful family members craned their necks to see what had caused such a dramatic reaction. What is it? Miguel asked, though his voice suggested he was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be good. It's the ownership papers for the Meridian hotel chain, Dad said slowly, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. And according to this, the chain is owned by Rodriguez Hospitality Group. Rodriguez Hospitality Group? Carmen repeated. Who owns Rodriguez Hospitality Group? Marcus stepped forward with professional precision. According to our records, Rodriguez Hospitality Group is owned entirely by Isabella Rodriguez Martinez. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the jazz quartet packing up their instruments on the stage and the distant sound of kitchen staff cleaning up in the restaurant below. 50 pairs of eyes slowly turned to look at me, sitting at table 7 with the college students and career starters, my simple black dress suddenly feeling like armor against the shocked stares of my family. Isabella owns the hotel chain? Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. According to our corporate records, Ms. Martinez owns all 67 Meridian hotels across North America, Marcus confirmed with obvious satisfaction. The Beverly Hills property where you're celebrating tonight is just one location in what Forbes recently described as the fastest-growing luxury hospitality empire in the Western Hemisphere. 67 hotels. The number seemed to hit the main table like a physical force. My brother Miguel made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. But that's impossible, Carmen said, her voice rising with panic. Isabella works in hotel management. She doesn't own. Actually, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying himself. Ms. Martinez founded Rodriguez Hospitality Group 5 years ago with the acquisition of 3 boutique hotels in San Francisco. Since then, she's expanded the portfolio to include luxury properties in 12 major cities, with a combined value of approximately $4.7 billion. $4.7 billion. The number hung in the air like a golden elephant that nobody could quite process. 4.7 billion? Uncle Roberto repeated weakly. According to the most recent Forbes valuation, yes, sir. The Meridian chain is considered one of the most successful hospitality companies in North America. I stood up slowly from table 7 and walked toward the main table, my simple black dress and confident stride carrying me across the ballroom that I actually owned. Every step felt like crossing a bridge from one version of my life to another. Hi everyone, I said quietly as I approached the table where my family sat in various stages of shock and disbelief. How's dinner? The question seemed to break whatever spell had been holding them frozen. Suddenly everyone was talking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions and exclamations. Isabella, is this true? You own 67 hotels? $4.7 billion? Why didn't you tell us? I held up my hand for silence, and the room gradually quieted until only the sound of my own heartbeat filled the space. Yes, it's true, I said simply. I founded Rodriguez Hospitality Group 5 years ago. We now operate luxury hotels in 12 cities, employ over 15,000 people, and generate annual revenues of approximately $2 billion. The numbers seemed to hit them like waves against a seawall. Each revelation created new impossibilities to reconcile with their assumptions about my life and career. But you said you worked in hotel management, Dad said weakly. I do work in hotel management, I replied. I manage 67 of them. But we assumed. Mom started, then stopped, unable to articulate what they'd assumed without making it sound even worse than it already was. You assumed I was unsuccessful because I dress modestly and don't talk about my work constantly, I said gently. You decided I was a failure because I drive a simple car and live in a modest apartment. But why live modestly if you're worth billions? Asked Miguel, his voice full of genuine confusion. Because money doesn't define who you are. Because I wanted to see if my family could love me for myself rather than my net worth. Because I believe in using wealth to create opportunities for others rather than to impress people. The explanation seemed to resonate with some family members while completely baffling others. They were struggling to reconcile their assumptions about success and lifestyle with the reality of someone who chose simplicity despite having unlimited resources. Isabella, Carmen said carefully, when you said you worked in hospitality, I meant exactly what I said. I work in the hospitality industry. I just didn't specify that I owned a significant portion of it. But the children's table, Dad said, his voice cracking with what might have been shame or disbelief. We put you at the children's table. You put me at table 7 because you assumed I wasn't successful enough to sit with the adults, I corrected. You decided that 32 years old wasn't mature enough for serious conversation if those years hadn't produced the kind of achievements you could recognize and respect. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I watched my family grapple with the reality of their behavior, with the knowledge that they had publicly humiliated someone who owned the building where they were celebrating. We had no idea, Uncle Roberto said, though his voice suggested he was beginning to understand how inadequate that excuse sounded. You had no idea because you never asked, I replied. For 5 years I've been building a hospitality empire, employing thousands of people, creating luxury experiences for travelers around the world. And for 5 years, you've all assumed I was unsuccessful because my achievements didn't fit your narrow definition of recognizable success. Marcus cleared his throat politely. Ms. Martinez, shall I proceed with the presidential suite upgrade for the reception? Please do, I said. And Marcus? I'd like the full VIP treatment for my family. They deserve the very best this hotel has to offer. Of course, Ms. Martinez. It will be our pleasure to provide exceptional service for your family celebration. As Marcus walked away to arrange the upgrade, I looked around the main table at 50 family members who were finally seeing me clearly for the first time in 5 years. The presidential suite? Mom asked weakly. 12,000 square feet, private terrace, panoramic city views, and a personal butler for the evening, I explained. I thought you might enjoy celebrating your anniversary somewhere more appropriate for successful adults. The irony wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Here they'd been celebrating their success in a hotel owned by the family member they'd relegated to the children's table because she wasn't successful enough for adult conversation. Isabella, Dad said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine remorse, we owe you an enormous apology. You owe me honesty, I corrected. For 5 years, you've made assumptions about my life without bothering to ask questions. You've treated me like a failure because I didn't fit your expectations of what success should look like. We never meant to make you feel like a failure, Carmen protested. Didn't you? You just seated me with college students because you assumed I wasn't accomplished enough to sit with successful adults. You told me this table was for people who had established themselves professionally and financially. The words hit like physical blows. Around the table, family members shifted uncomfortably as they were forced to confront their own behavior and assumptions. What happens now? Miguel asked quietly. How you know the truth, I said. The question is what you do with it. We want to do better, Mom said immediately. All of us. We want to understand your work, support your success, celebrate your achievements. I hope so, I said. Because despite everything I love this family. But I won't tolerate being treated like a child anymore. As the evening progressed and my family gradually moved to the presidential suite for their upgraded reception, I found myself surrounded by relatives who suddenly wanted to understand my business, my vision, my success. The transformation was dramatic. From family disappointment to family celebrity in the span of a single revelation. But more importantly, it felt like the beginning of honest relationships built on reality rather than assumptions. For the first time in 5 years I was being seen for who I actually was rather than who they thought I should be. The kids' table sat empty in the corner of the ballroom, a $12,000 reminder that success comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most successful person in the room is the one you least expect. After all, anyone can afford an expensive dinner. It takes something special to own the place where you're eating it,